The inheritance. You're not getting a penny when I'm gone, my stepmother Sandra hissed across the hospital bed. This house, the money, everything goes to David. You've done nothing but disappoint your father. I stood there holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, watching my father sleep fitfully in the ICU. Machines beeped around us, monitoring his failing heart. Sandra had been at his bedside for 3 days straight, playing the devoted wife while shooting me venomous looks whenever I entered the room. I'm not here for money, I said quietly. I'm here because he's my father. She laughed bitterly. Your father? Where were you when he needed you? David's been taking care of him, visiting every week, helping with the yard work. You show up twice a year if we're lucky. David, her son from her first marriage, nodded from his chair in the corner. He'd been my stepbrother for 15 years, ever since Dad married Sandra when I was 12. He was 3 years older, and from day one, Sandra had made it clear who the favored child was. I live 4 hours away, I said. I have a job, responsibilities. Excuses, Sandra cut me off. David manages just fine and he lives even farther. The difference is he cares. I bit back my response. David worked part-time at a hardware store and still lived in his mother's old house. Of course he could visit more often. But there was no point arguing with Sandra. There never had been. Dad's eyes fluttered open. Michael. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, Dad. I moved closer to the bed, ignoring Sandra's disapproving glare. I need to tell you something, he said, his hand reaching for mine. About the will. Sandra tensed. Harold, you need to rest. Don't worry about that now. But Dad's grip tightened on my hand. The safe, he whispered. Behind the painting in my study. The combination is your mother's birthday. My breath caught. My mother, Dad's first wife, had died when I was 8. Sandra had packed away all her photos within months of moving in, claiming it was unhealthy for Dad to hold on to the past. Dad, what are you talking about? His eyes were urgent now, more alert than I'd seen them in days. The real will, Michael. The one Sandra doesn't know about. I changed it 2 years ago after. He trailed off, his breathing becoming labored. Sandra stood up abruptly. Harold, you're confused. The medication is making you say things that don't make sense. I'm not confused, Dad said, his voice stronger now. I know exactly what I'm saying. Michael, the safe. Remember that. The machines started beeping frantically. Nurses rushed in, pushing us back as they worked to stabilize him. Within minutes it was over. My father was gone. Sandra's sobs filled the room, but I felt numb. 15 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, and now this cryptic message about a safe I'd never heard of. The funeral was 2 days later. Sandra played the grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences while David stood beside her like the dutiful son. I felt like a stranger at my own father's service, watching from the sidelines as Sandra's friends and David's co-workers shared memories I wasn't part of. After the burial, Sandra announced the will would be read at the house the following day. It's just a formality, she said to me with false sympathy. Harold always said the house would go to David and there's a small trust fund for you. Nothing substantial but enough to help with your student loans. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. All I could think about was Dad's words, the safe, behind the painting in my study. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, the same room Sandra had reluctantly let me keep when she redecorated everything else. I stared at the ceiling, remembering Dad's urgent whisper, the way he'd gripped my hand. Was he really talking about a different will, or was it just the medication? The next morning, Sandra's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, arrived with a manila envelope. We gathered in the living room, Sandra, David, and me, as he opened the document. The will is straightforward, Peterson began. Harold left the house and primary assets to David Morrison, with a $20,000 trust fund for Michael Harrison. Sandra nodded approvingly. That's what we expected. Harold always said David was like the son he never had. I flinched at the words but said nothing. There is one unusual clause, Peterson continued, adjusting his glasses. Harold specifically requested that Michael be given access to his personal study for 1 hour alone, to collect any items of sentimental value. This access is to be granted immediately after the will reading. Sandra's face darkened. That's ridiculous. What could possibly be in there that would be sentimental to Michael? They barely spoke. Nevertheless, Peterson said, it's clearly stated in the will. Mr. Harrison has the right to 1 hour in the study unsupervised. My heart pounded. Dad had planned this. Somehow he'd known. Fine, Sandra said through gritted teeth. But I want to know what you take. Nothing valuable leaves that room. An hour later I stood alone in Dad's study for the first time in years. Sandra had always kept it locked, claiming it was her private space now. The room felt frozen in time. Dad's pipe still on the desk, his reading glasses beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I looked around frantically for a painting. There were several on the walls, but behind a small landscape painting of mountains I found it. A small wall safe, maybe 10 inches square. My hands shook as I entered the combination. 0-8-1-5, my mother's birthday. The safe clicked open. Inside were documents, some jewelry that had belonged to my mother, and a thick envelope marked for Michael only. I opened it with trembling fingers. The first document was a will dated 2 years ago. My eyes scanned the pages and my legs nearly gave out. Dad had left me the house, the investments, everything. David got a small trust fund, the same amount Sandra had told me I was getting. But it was the letter underneath that made my chest tight. My dearest Michael, if you're reading this, then Sandra has tried to deceive you about your inheritance. 2 years ago I discovered that she and David had been stealing from me, forging checks, using my credit cards, taking money from my accounts. They thought I was too sick to notice, but I've been watching. I also learned that Sandra had been intercepting your letters and emails, telling you I didn't want to see you while telling me you were too busy to visit. She's been manipulating both of us for years, keeping us apart. I know I haven't been the father you deserved. I let Sandra convince me that you were distant and ungrateful, when the truth was she was poisoning me against you. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. The safe contains evidence of their theft. Bank statements, forged documents, everything you'll need if they try to contest this will. I've also included your mother's jewelry, which Sandra hid from you all these years. I love you, Michael. Always have. That. I sat on the floor, overwhelmed. Everything I'd believed about my relationship with Dad, about why we'd grown apart, had been a lie. Sandra had orchestrated it all. There was a knock on the door. Time's up, Sandra called. I quickly gathered everything. The real will, the evidence, my mother's jewelry, and stuffed it all into my jacket. When I opened the door, Sandra and David were waiting. Well, Sandra asked. Find anything sentimental? I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. I saw the calculating coldness in her eyes, the way David avoided my gaze entirely. Just some old photos, I said. Nothing important. Sandra smiled triumphantly. Good. Now you can get your affairs in order. David will need to take possession of the house next month. Actually, I said, I think there might be a problem with that. What do you mean? I pulled out the real will. I mean this. Sandra's face went white as she read. David leaned over her shoulder, his mouth falling open. This is impossible, Sandra whispered. This can't be legal. It's not notarized, it's not. It's perfectly legal, I said. Dated, signed, witnessed. Mr. Peterson will be very interested to see it. David finally spoke, his voice shaking. You can't do this. We've been taking care of him for years. You don't deserve. Taking care of him? I pulled out the bank statements. Is that what you call forging his signature? Stealing his money? Sandra's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the couch, staring at the documents. How did you? Dad knew, I said. He knew everything. The fake will Peterson read? Dad made sure that existed so you'd think you'd won. He wanted to see exactly what kind of people you really were. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Dad's old grandfather clock. You can't prove any of this, Sandra said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. Dad documented everything. Every forged check, every unauthorized withdrawal, every lie you told to keep us apart. He spent 2 years building a case against you. David's face had gone gray. What are you going to do? I looked at them both. These people who had stolen not just money but years of my relationship with my father. Who had made me believe I was unwanted, unloved. I'm going to call Mr. Peterson, I said. And then I'm going to call the police. Dad wanted me to have a choice. Pursue criminal charges or let you both disappear forever. Never contact me again, never come back to this town, and I won't press charges. Sandra stood up slowly. You can't be serious. This is our home. No, I said firmly. This was never your home. You were just passing through and now you're done. 2 hours later, Mr. Peterson sat in the living room, examining the real will and the evidence of fraud. Sandra and David waited in the kitchen, their faces ashen. This is extraordinary, Peterson said. Your father was incredibly thorough. These documents would definitely hold up in court, both for the inheritance and for criminal charges. What happens now? The house is yours, as are all the assets outlined in this will. As for Sandra and David, he glanced toward the kitchen. That's your decision. I walked to the kitchen where Sandra sat with her head in her hands. David stared out the window, probably seeing his whole future crumble. I meant what I said. I told them. You have 24 hours to pack whatever belongs to you and leave. Never come back, never contact me, and I won't press charges. But if I ever see you again, if you ever try to contest this will or cause any trouble, I'll make sure you both go to prison. Sandra looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. Michael, please. We can work this out. We're family. No, I said. We were never family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and tear people apart. David finally spoke. What about the money what about what we took? Consider it severance pay, I said. The cost of getting you out of my life forever. They left that night, packing hastily and quietly. I watched from the window as they loaded David's truck. 2 people who had controlled my life for 15 years now reduced to sneaking away in the dark. The next morning I sat in Dad's study reading his letter again. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. For the first time in years the house felt peaceful. I thought about all the visits I'd missed, all the conversations we'd never had, all the time Sandra had stolen from us. But I also thought about Dad's final act, the elaborate plan to expose the truth and give me back what was mine. He'd been protecting me one last time. I picked up my phone and called Peterson. I want to contest their claim on the trust fund too, I said. If they stole from him, they don't deserve a penny. That's going to be complicated, he warned. I have time, I said, looking around the study that was finally mine. I have all the time in the world. 3 months later I was living in the house full-time, working remotely and slowly making it my own. I'd found more of my mother's things hidden in the attic. Photo albums, letters, jewelry that Sandra had claimed was lost. I never heard from Sandra or David again. But sometimes late at night I'd sit in Dad's chair and imagine what our relationship might have been like if Sandra had never come between us. I'd think about the conversations we should have had, the memories we should have made. And I'd remember his final words, I love you, Michael. I always have. It wasn't enough to make up for the lost years, but it was enough to help me heal. Dad had spent his final years uncovering the truth and planning his revenge. He'd given me justice, but more importantly, he'd given me closure. The house was mine now, but more than that, I finally had the truth. And sometimes that's the most valuable inheritance of all.